All right, so let's get into our second topic, close reading. If you come into our Google Classroom site, click on classwork, there's a section called close reading. Let me just kind of reorder that a little bit. We're going to start by doing a close reading together of a text called A Poison Tree by William Blake. So if you'll look at this with me, my glasses are really glary. William Blake lived in, he died. Where was he born? I'm not sure. 1794. It was long enough ago that as long as we know it was in the late 1700s, we kind of have an idea. He's an old dude. And I chose this poem because it's short and easy for us to deal with. So this is called A Poison Tree. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not, my wrath did grow. And I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears. And I sunned it with smiles, and with soft deceitful wiles. And it grew both day and night, till it bore an apple bright. And my foe beheld it shine, and he knew that it was mine. And into my garden stole, when the night had veiled the pole. In the morning glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree. The Poison Tree, A Poison Tree. I picked this for a couple of reasons. Blake is a beautiful poet, but you have to admit this does kind of sound like a Dr. Seuss rhyme. It's very ba 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 ba. The couplets have that really fun little rhyme ending. It's simple, but I can imagine reading this and just like I did right there and just being like, okay, I read A Poison Tree. Now I'm moving on to the next poem I have to read. But in college and really all the time, we want to do close reading so we're sure that we really understand what's happening in the text. So this is how I recommend doing that. Underneath the full text of A Poison Tree, I want this to be there. Our close reading questions. So this is a strategy I teach students to utilize whenever they have to read something kind of tricky and they immediately forget it. So what we have to do is pay attention to how we think about a text. So this is what I mean when I say that. Like if I'm reading something I'm not interested in, I'm watching my brain and I'm paying attention to what my brain is paying attention to while I read. And I find that the best way to do that is to develop questions as I read. So the whole time I'm reading, I'm like, well, what about this? Well, what's that? Well, what about this? Well, what's that? And if I always question while I read, things get stickier. The text becomes, it's like I'm putting little patches of Velcro on the text that's going to stay inside my brain. So I teach 3 levels of questions. I've refined this from several years of instruction and other pedagogies. It doesn't matter. I think this works well. Level 1 questions are unlocking what's just happening in the text. They uncover meaning and just have a factual answer. So some examples of level 1 questions for A Poison Tree includes, what does wrath mean? What are deceitful wiles? When and where did William Blake live? If you're working with a text, I recommend jotting these down, like annotating it on the paper. But for most of our lives, we're all on a computer. So if you can import a text into like a Google Doc, which KYVL will mostly let you do, then you can annotate with comments, lots of different things like that. But we want to notice what we don't know. Like, you're not going to understand this poem if you don't know what wrath means and you don't take a minute to look it up. You got to look it up. If deceitful wiles, if that's confusing, we have to take a minute to look it up. So when I did this workshop at 11, I asked everybody to write several level 1 questions for this text. Some of the level 1 questions that emerged was, what is a foe? Well, a foe is an enemy, somebody you don't like. Somebody asked, what is wrath? Wrath is anger. Wrath is just being like angry with somebody. And you can infer that. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did. So I was mad, but I told him about it and then I got over it, right? I was angry with my foe. I was angry with my enemy. I told him that. I just bottled it up. I didn't say anything. And my wrath, it grew. My anger grew. It got bigger. So let's look over the text. Are there any more level 1 questions in here? Some people asked about deceitful wiles. A wile is a story, like a story that you tell. And to be deceitful means to lie to somebody. So when the author is saying, and I send it with smiles and with soft, deceitful wiles, he's like lying to himself, telling little stories to lie to himself about these fears, this anger that he's just kind of nurturing. I think that the language in this is pretty simple. Some people had questions about stole and into my garden stole. This is referencing this guy, right? Maybe it's a lady. I don't know. But and my foe beheld it shine. So my foe looked at this apple, this bright apple, and he knew that it was mine. He's like, I don't want to see that apple. I want that. That belongs to my enemy. And into my garden stole. It means like he snuck into his garden. He snuck in there. So with level 1 questions, with any text that you do, you've got to unlock the smallest pieces first. If there's vocabulary you don't know, you've got to unlock it. If it references a city you've never heard of, you need to look it up and find it on a map. If it references a person you're unsure about, do a quick Google search, spend 1.5 minutes skimming over the Wikipedia page, and just let your brain make a connection. Do not skip over text you don't understand and presume it'll work itself out later. That's not how you read for college. You really got to do close reading. So level 1 questions can be answered with a dictionary or a brief online search. The answers to those questions, they're just facts. They're not disputable. There's not going to be a discussion. It's just true. All right. So level 1 questions are easy to create. They're easy to discuss. They're easy to find the answer to. So those are level 1. Level 1. You always want to do those. Level 2. Level 2 questions address what is happening in the text. They require analysis, argument. Thinking about them helps us understand what's going on in the greater text. Now, this is mostly true for literary works. Level 2 questions maybe aren't as applicable if you're reading a scientific journal paper. You might just have level 1s and level 3s. But really, if you're reading a poem, a short story, even an article where the writer might have a point of view, level 2 questions matter. Here's some examples of some. Why does the narrator tell his friend of his anger, but not his foe? Look at stanza 1. I talked to my friend about it, but I didn't talk to my enemy. Why? Interesting. Why? In stanza 2, we get the impression that the narrator puts a lot of energy into his anger. Why do people nurse anger like that? And this is really a level 3, which you'll see in a minute. But we see here in this stanza, he's watering it with fears. He's putting his tears. He's emotional over it. He's sending it with smiles. Any way that he can kind of feed this anger, he's doing it. He just is nursing it. What is the underlying meaning of when the night had veiled the pole? So this is kind of getting into a longer quote. If you're looking at something like this probably isn't a level 1 question because Google's not going to translate when the night unveiled the pole. But if you type in just to a basic search, a poison tree, Blake, when the night had veiled the pole, you're going to find a lot of people's analysis of what that line specifically means. I recommend doing that sometimes if you feel totally lost. This line specifically, most analysts kind of agree, or most English major people like me, that the pole is referencing Polaris, the North Star, and when the night had veiled it, to veil something is to cover it up. So it's almost like it's a cloudy night and the North Star has been covered up. And in the land of metaphor and imagery, it's like the truth is covered up. The right way is covered up. All of that's hidden from view. That's a trickier analysis. That's a more English lit kind of analysis. But that is a level 2 question. We don't want to just skip over this line and leave it forever. We want to understand it. What other text, what other books, movies, videos, speeches, articles, poems, songs does this remind me of? Making those connections helps us understand what this is about a little bit more. So I would stop and think does this remind me of a song I know? Does this remind me of a story I've heard? I think one of my students from 11 o'clock was like, oh yeah, this reminds me of a Bible story I know about your anger. So try to make connections with text as you read and answer those level 2 questions for yourself. I think of the poison apple. Like he's like, it's this bright apple. It's a poison tree. I think of like that witch in Snow White with that shiny red apple, and she's just offering it in her witchy way. And that helps me visualize this a little bit more, and it unlocks it for me. We have to unlock text to understand it in order to write about it later. Like the two go hand in hand. Reading is writing and writing is reading. We have to do both. Most level 2 questions are really discussions. There's not going to be a simple or direct answer. I mean, your teacher might be like, hey, this is the answer. And you can be like, cool, that's good. Like I just did with the poll. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not exactly it. So you can always make an argument in a different way through examples and connections and literary analysis. But the level 2 questions are only going to make sense to other people that have also read this poem or are currently reading it with you. If I just randomly go to my daughter and say, in stanza 2, why is the narrator putting all of his energy into his anger? She's going to be like, she's not going to know what to say. It's not going to make any sense to her. So these are for people that are reading it with you. And these are discussion-based questions to help us understand the poem. Okay? Level 3 questions are address what's happening. These address what is happening in the world or a shared human experience. So this is a different level. They require consideration and argument. And when we think about them, we better understand the text. But people can talk about these questions without having read the story or the text or the poem or heard the song or watched the movie. Like, we can just all talk about these things. So here's a level 3 question. Why is it so hard to let go of anger? How can anger lead to violence? What are some examples in which violence erupted after extended anger fostered in a person or community? These questions are important because when we ask them, that's when we can find a doorway into a claim. This is how I think it makes the most sense to look for an argument, is by first thinking of a question. So let me break it down for you a little bit. Let's say that you take some time and write a couple of level 1 questions, a couple of level 2 questions, a couple of level 3 questions about the texts that you're reading. This is how I tend to do this mental work. If I'm reading something like this, I would annotate my level 1s and level 2s. If a level 3 pops into my head, I'd jot it down. I would write them over to the side, or I would maybe use this little comment guy. I would keep track of them. And then I would read again, and I'd read again. I'd look up the stuff I need to look up, read again, and then those level 3 questions start to come to me. So let me break this poem down for you. Like, presuming that all of your level 1 and level 2 questions have been kind of addressed and discussed. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did. I was mad at my buddy. We talked about it. I was fine. I was mad at my foe. I didn't talk about it. And I got still more angry. My wrath grew. I watered it with fears, tears, smiles, wiles. He pouring all of this energy into this negative hate. Just keeping it there. And it grew both day and night till it bore an apple bright. So it gave fruit to this apple on this poison tree, and my foe beheld it shine. So my enemy is looking, and they see this like beautiful apple, and he knew that it was mine. So he knows that that apple belongs to me, but we're still like enemies. He doesn't care. He's going to sneak into the garden. He's not going to have like any kind of guiding light. The pole is veiled. There's nothing to intercede to help him out. And in the morning, glad I see. I'm so happy because now my foe is outstretched beneath the tree. He's eaten the apple and he's dead. He's just like dead there, laying under the tree. And the narrator is happy about it because he was so angry that his anger led to this violence. It erupted in this violence. This is A Poison Tree by William Blake. Now, I want to show you one last thing, and we'll finish out our close reading video, okay? And these are the comments from the Google Meet that we did at 11 o'clock. So we read this poem together. We talked about levels of questions, and everybody kind of posted their level 1 questions, level 2 questions, level 3. And what I want to point out to you is how you can turn a level 3 question into a claim. So let's say that for your essay, you really are feeling William Blake. You're feeling this poem. You feel like you can make some connections to some stuff that's happening or has happened in our world. You want to write about this. Well, here are some questions that other eminent students developed around this. Why do people decide not to express their feelings of anger? How much does holding in anger affect decision-making and reasoning? What are some ways to express your emotions? What's the best way to handle stress or anger? Why does he spend so much time nurturing the tree? What makes it important? Why do some people spend so much energy nurturing anger? That's kind of similar. How do we see anger and wrath today, and how does it relate to the tree? Why are friends important? So then I took a couple of those and I turned them into claims and just watch. I just added in the title of the poem, the author, and then tried to take the questions into an argument voice and into a formal tone. In A Poison Tree by William Blake, the narrator demonstrates that there are negative ways to handle stress and anger. And then you could support that by analyzing the poem. William Blake exposes the risks of nurturing anger in A Poison Tree. It's a claim. In A Poison Tree, Blake contrasts how humans relate to friends and enemies differently. It's a claim. So I like close reading for a couple of reasons. At the end of it, even though it takes time, we understand what we've read. We can think and talk about what we've read. And we have created some little platforms, some springboards for ourselves for creating claims, for making an argument that we could then write about and support. So I hope that this is helpful to you. I really do recommend thinking about how you think. You've got to think about how you think. Do some metacognition while you're reading. And then that will create Velcro in your brain and in the text, and it will allow you to kind of own it more instead of it being a thing on the paper that's not really a part of your understanding of the world. So this is the video on close reading. I hope that it's helpful to you. I'm going to hang up here, and our next video is about looking at these writing samples, looking at the writing rubric, and